The title of the article that my group refers to is the concept of ethnicity in social psychological research, which is about definitional issues. The author of the article is Hanna Zagievka from Royal Holloway, University of London. What is ethnicity? Ethnicity is explained as the origin to which people with a common background, language, race, and culture are connected. An ethnic, on the other hand, can be explained as the group of people whose members group and otherize each other based on real or later created common past. There are three broad issues will be discussed, which is terminological fuzziness, the treatment of ethnicity as the generic identity category, and the treatment of ethnicity in ways which are incompatible with acknowledging the constructed nature of ethnicity. The treatment of ethnicity is in ways which are incompatible with the constructed nature of ethnicity. Another concern with the way ethnicity is conceptualized in much of quantitative social psychology is that it is incompatible with the prevalent definition of ethnicity favored in most social science, with the notion of ethnicity as constructed. In sum, future research could benefit from a reinforcement of greater conceptual clarity regarding the concept ethnicity from a greater willingness among social identity researchers to consider the specific properties of ethnicity, from theories reflecting on the question of how psychological and empirical reality are proposed to correspond to each other, from psychologists refraining to equate ethnicity and race in their writing, from the use of methodological triangulation, and from more transparency in publication about practices used in the ethnic group membership assignment of participants.
The treatment of ethnicity in quantitative social psychology and problems that arising. There were three broad issues will be discussed, which is terminological fuzziness, the treatment of ethnicity as a generic identity category, and the treatment of ethnicity in ways which are incompatible with acknowledging the contrast nature of ethnicity. Well, now I will present about the first issue, which is terminological fuzziness. In social psychology research, the term ethnicity is rarely used. It's frequently interchanged with phrases like country, cultural group, minority group, and race. Scholars have tried and failed for a long time to separate the terms. Scholars frequently confuse the term country and ethnicity. Profiting from the overlap between these two concepts could be beneficial. Within a single country, ethnic traits can exist in both minorities and majorities. The distinction between minority and majority groups is not based on ethnicity. The term ethnicity was coined to reject the idea of fundamental biological differences across social groups. The term ethnicity has come to connote precisely the essentialist ideas that it was intended to dispel.
Now I am presenting about analyze the issue in this article, which is the treatment of ethnicities and generic identity categories. Firstly, the under-conceptualization of ethnicities in psychology causes us to limit the types of issues we can investigate unnecessarily. For a long time, researchers in this tradition have claimed that there are interests in social groups and generic entities. The minimal groups methods were used to study these entities, in which commercial groups were formed in the lab based on minimum categorization criteria that had no correspondence or relevance outside of the lab. Similarly, when studying one type of naturally occurring social identities, results were suggested to be generalizable to all other types of social identities. For example, when studying one type of naturally occurring social identities, results were suggested to be generalizable to all other types of social identities. This transition has led researchers to believe that identification processes are mostly generic. They are only look at the attribute and content of the real-world identification categories that are studied a few times. In these ethnic studies, the concept of ethnicities is rarely discussed or defined. So the purpose is not just to argue that some ethnic specific processes are generic, or to accept that ethnic groups are not ideas for demonstrating more universal identification processes. Rather, an Overabundance of focus on generic processes linked to the formations of a blind spot for processes that are distinctive to certain identity categorized like race. For example, some social groups are frequently associated with significantly different behavior than others. An emphasis of generic identifications processes runs the risk of removing a variety of critical social phenomena from the active investigation such as ethnicities. And for example, harming members of different ethnic groups over an intergroup quarrels is far more prevalent than killing members of another ethnic group. Explaining such difference is a matter of psychology, but scholars are bad to do so unless they are willing to think about the natures of certain groups, such as ethnicity, to some level.
The last issue in this article is the treatment of ethnicity in where we are incompatible with the constructed notion of ethnicity. One of the main issues with the post notion of ethnicity in social psychology is that it is inconsistent with most social scientific definition of ethnicity. This can be shown in some theories as a self-classification theory and in psychological tendency to make up the theme ethnicity and race. It will explain where us of if belief and action reject the critique component of ethnicity in the following session. The next is psychological theory and the constructed notion of ethnicity. The psychological and racial origin or race and ethnic group can be shown through social categorization. According to the self-classification theory, SCT, categorization is an objective understanding of the world and human prefers rare objective. The treatment of objectively defined races category is not limited to SCT. However, irrelevant dimensions are choose personal race than objective environment of relatives. Summary between objects might be suggestion as well. The explain should be exercised because it shows where determinant rare based on an internal in-process set of objectives stable and impossible. On the other hand, some psychological theory can be defined as roding carried position in natural sensitive related than social contraction. Then the practical of equity, ethnicity and race and the contracted notion of ethnicity. When the term ethnicity and race are used together, it means that ethnicity is based on objective science rather than a contracted biological nature. As a result, it is seen as having an empirical related by objective, fact-related than personal precision. The last is methodology choices and the contracted notion of ethnicity. The idea that ethnicity is not formal is supported by many quantitatively oriented research methodology choices. Most of quantitative social psychology is based on a modern is where particular characteristic of the social interaction or modified and the effect on it. A definite dependent measure are recorded. As a result, the moment look to claim the relative is objective rather than social protection. It is dangerous to think that ethnic groups are claimed and inhibited in this sense. This is a large of information about how to participate group members were determined. 7 study content participate decisions that make much but are.
So I'm going to present the discussion of the article. To sum up the main argument, it was established that ethnicity does not tend to be theories much within current quantitative social psychology. Some approaches to ethnicity in other social sciences were reviewed and an argument was advanced for a moderate constructivist position. Then, some issues were highlighted which arise from the under-conceptualization of ethnicity in quantitative social psychology. Firstly, it was highlighted that not defining ethnicity in our research or confounding it with related term can lead to the terminology of confusion. Secondly, it was discussed how the strong emphasis of generic processes and the lack of the specific characteristic of ethnicity present. Thirdly, it was discussed how the psychology theory, writing and research practice ignore the construction of nature of ethnicity. It was highlighted how this could complicate the interpretation of the result. Further, it was discussed how the assumption, the ethnic category, which seem pertinent to the researcher are objective. And finally, it was argued that ignoring the structure of ethnicity, nature of ethnicity, bear the danger of reproducing of racist ideologies. All in all, there are more than enough reason to seek remedies for the issue that were highlighted. But what the practical conclusion that can be drawn to improve our research practice? First of all, the problem of the theoretical fuzziness should be addressed by the researchers starting to be explicit about the meaning in which they employ the construct. Secondly, it would be beneficial if quantitative social identity researchers did not unnecessarily limit the scope of their investigation by focusing solely on generic identity process. Thirdly, if it imperative that quantitative social psychologists start appreciating the construction nature of ethnicity. In sum, research could benefit from a reinforcement of the greater conceptual clarity regarding the concept of ethnicity. Firstly, from the greater willingness among social identity researchers to consider the specific properties of the ethnicity, from the theories reflecting on the question of how psychological and empirical reality are proposed to correspond to each other, from the psychologists refraining the acquired ethnicity and race in their writing, from the use of methodology triangulation